What about this business of horses?
Sorry, what was that?
What about this business of horses in the Book of Mormon? Has that raised any problems?
It has, according to some of the archaeological scholars.
We can't get any further until we've taken care of horses then, because this is the main crux. This is the strongest argument, supposedly, that's been raised against the Book of Mormon. What about these horses it's talking about here? What's the objection? Why shouldn't they talk about horses? Incidentally, here again, this also introduces us to another thing. How we interpret the words. You see, if you're going to be literal, according to this, every male over the age of 20 owned more than one horse. It says every man returned to his horses. Well, what that means, every man, such as they were, returned to as many horses as he had, such as they were, you see. This is, that it all returned, every man with his family and his horses. Notice the use of, it's generic. See, all the men returned, whatever men there were that had horses, returned to whatever horses they had. See, this is generic, as it tells us, because it's the indefinite whatsoever. Whatsoever man had whatsoever horses, returned to whatsoever horses he had. Yes, Brother?
I'm sorry, I don't know where we're at.
Oh, we begin with the 6th chapter of 3rd Nephi. And fittingly, we begin with the 3rd verse, where the bard takes a deep breath, it's an epic, and begins another phase of the story entirely. New beginning, happy, not a happy ending, but a definite ending to the war. Everything is settled down. Everybody's back home. Everybody's happy. They've returned to their farms. Now we expect a glorious period. Well, we're going to run ahead. And, we go on. We've got to get rid of these horses business up, because this worries us, doesn't it? Is there any evidence that Indians has horses? Well, sure, they rode horses all over the plains, but when and where did they get those horses? Well, nobody knows, as a matter of fact. But first of all, what about horses in Egypt? We know they had them in the New Kingdom because we have pictures of them and so forth. But if you go look for horses' bones, you'll never find any. No evidence of that sort. And the classic example, of course, is the camel. Professor Albright, who is the foremost American biblical scholar that ever was, absolutely insisted that people in Abraham's day didn't have camels. Camel wasn't risen until the 11th century. There were no camels. And, let's ask somebody here. Brother Burdett, well, I asked you something already. Where do you read about camels in the Bible? Do you remember who rides camels? Remember who has riding away on the camels, and she has the icon hidden under the camel's saddle and so forth? It goes back to the patriarchal romances. You know, that's the story of Isaac and Rebecca. That's Rebecca at the well, isn't it? Isaac and, what's her name? Rachel, of course. Rachel. In the time of Abraham, you see, in Abraham, he places us there, 1800, 2000 BC, way back there. In other words, the patriarchal narratives talk, everybody riding around in camels in the patriarchal narratives. Yet, the best scholars say they didn't have camels. There's no evidence that they had camels. There were no camels. All we have is the written record. But the written record is quite adequate, isn't it? Where did they get the idea of their having camels and riding around in them and so forth? All it takes, you see, is just one piece of evidence, and that changes the whole picture. So you're not going to prove anything not going to prove a negative by the absence of something as far as that goes. But these horses, did every man have a horse here? What is the Sister Burton? Is Burton here? Yes, I mean. And Brother Buss?
Yes.
Brother Buss. What kind of horses do you find in America in the early days? The fossil horse.
Fossil horse, they're short horse.
It began in America, didn't it? It was an Eohippus, a little tiny thing, not much bigger than the jackrabbit. They wouldn't have ridden those around. So we make jokes about that. But what about the intervening phases? What's missing? There are all sorts of big gaps in it. See what could have been there and what couldn't. It's very hard to determine these things. There was J.B.S. Haldane, the great British biologist, who said that the evolution of the horse is more certain than the proof of the Pythagorean theorem. It's more certain than any mathematical demonstration. It's absolutely certain. Since he said that, of course, it's been shown the evidence, the descent of the horses is full of holes as anything. There's no unbroken record whatever to be established. But this is where it goes. But then when horses come, Indians are the greatest riders that were, the Plains Indians. Well, do you learn to ride Do people change customs overnight? Brother Call, is Brother Call here? Yes, now a custom like riding, is that acquired readily and quickly by people? I'm talking about the various things that H.G. Wells wrote a story with his great historical imagination telling exactly how man first domesticated the horse. Primitive man was hanging from a bough and a horse ran under him and he let go and fell on his back and was riding him. So he became a rider. But we know from Mesopotamian records, which are very ample, that men drove horses in the Shibboleth horse, the Central Asian horse, drove horses as teams, even as quadrigas, as four-horse teams, for 1,000 years before anybody ever rode them. They never rode horses, they drove them. They had them pull wagons, that's so. Well, why do people not take advantage of those things and so forth? Well, look at us. Have you ever ridden a buffalo? Ride a Cape buffalo, or the very close cousin of the Cape buffalo? The Cape buffalo is supposed to be the most ferocious animal in the world. We don't ride buffaloes at all, but in Southeast Asia, little boys ride them. Naked little boys with sticks ride them all over, and the great beasts obey what they want them to do. We never dream of doing a thing like that. After all these thousands of years, we've known that we could exploit our cattle by riding them, but we don't. Other people will never ride a horse. Another thing, you would say that there's definite proof that the Arabs never knew the wheel, because they never ride wheeled vehicles. They don't ride it at all. They've known the wheel for thousands of years, but you won't find them using wheeled vehicles. They ride, but they don't. In fact, they're suspicious. They say that when the bicycles first started being used, they wouldn't touch them. They were forbidden because they say the dulab, that is the back wheel, the front wheel was driven by the iblis. The devil made the front wheel go, but you make the back wheel go. So you're cooperating with the devil when you ride a bicycle, so they wouldn't ride bicycles. No, but the thing is, through thousands of years, the Arabs have never been found using wheeled vehicles, so they knew all about them. They had wheels, they were practical and so forth. Well, Flinders Petrie, the Egyptologist, the father of Egyptian archaeology, pointed that out. The Egyptians had certain inventions, and they knew their neighbors had them, but they never adopted those conveniences, and the other way around. The neighbors never adopted their conveniences, and they worked very well on both sides. It's a very strange prejudice we have about these things. Now, my friend Woodrow Bora at Berkeley studied years the horse in America. Do you know where the Great Horse Exchange Center was in New Mexico? Anybody here? Well, we got just a call. Is Brother Clausen here? Brother Clausen? Yes. Where did the Spanish and the Indians used to buy and exchange their horses? In New Mexico, a well-known place beginning with Santa. Not a long word after that. It's just Santa and then Fe.
All right, there's a full class of students.
So the Santa Fe was the place where they traded the horses. But the interesting thing is, those horses didn't come from Mexico. They weren't Spanish horses. They didn't come from Mexico. They were going into Mexico from Santa Fe, and they all came from the plains. But that was in the 16th century, when the Spanish hadn't even been here before. So they were bringing the horses were coming down. And what's more, as I say, these customs are never adopted in riding and driving and so forth. People are extremely conservative in those things. And yet, we find the Indians the best bareback riders in the world. I got to see a horse and off they go. We're told when the horse appeared down in Peru and in Mexico, in the Incan Empire, people were terrified. They'd never seen a horse. They ran away. Well, why didn't the Plains Indians run away from the horse? Why didn't the other Indians in Florida and so forth run away from the horse? They didn't. There's no sign of their being even impressed by horses. They were far better riders than the Spanish. They knew all about it. So there are all sorts of blanks, all sorts of holes we know nothing about here. You can't make an open and shut case of the horse at all. And the moral is, of course, the problem isn't solved yet. And you can't prove a negative. So this shouldn't slow us down. We should go right on here. But when you see horses, people will immediately call you up on that, you see. But again, you can see that the language is used very generally here. There's much more we could say about horses, but this isn't it's not necessary now. Well, and notice nice things were going on here.